You're listening to Productivity Straight Talk with your host, Amber De La Garza. She is passionate, direct, and sometimes a little sarcastic, but always gives you what you need to succeed in business. Now, here's your host, Amber De La Garza, the Productivity Specialist.
Welcome, and thank you for listening to Productivity Straight Talk. Today is episode 012, Planting the Seeds of Tiny Habits with Linda Fogg Phillips. If you are an entrepreneur who wants to take consistent, massive, focused action in your business and life, then you're in the right place, and I'm so glad you've joined me. And for those of you that are coming back, I welcome you, and thanks for being here with us today. I'm excited about this episode because you're going to meet my dear friend and our guest, Linda Fogg Phillips. Linda Fogg Phillips is the director of Tiny Habits Academy, which offers online courses on how to create habits easily and successfully without relying on willpower. She has 8 children and a master's degree in health promotion and exercise physiology. Linda is an international author, public speaker, consultant, and habit coach. She is a featured social media and family health expert in the media and in publications such as the New York Times, CNN, ABC, CBS, Fox, and NBC. She was the online behavior expert for Facebook Inc. from 2009 to 2013. In 2015, Linda was crowned Miss United States of America Woman of Achievement. Wow, if that's not an introduction. And now you know who I call my very dear friend, Linda Fogg Phillips. And you also can see why I brought her on here today. When listening in on my conversation with Linda, you will discover the Tiny Habits method of habit organization. What habits have to do with molecular biology, how creating the right habits can change both your business and your personal life, why implementing big habits, just like New Year's resolutions, don't work, and how to design your own tiny habits recipe. And if that wasn't enough, you get to hear her coaching me. You get to listen in while she coaches me through my own tiny habit recipe. So let's dive right in and meet Linda. Hi, Linda Fogg Phillips. Welcome to Productivity Straight Talk. How are you doing today?
Great, Amber. How are you today?
Wonderful. I am so happy you are here and you are going to be talking to me all about habits and our listeners. You are an amazing woman, and I have been trying to get you on my podcast for a little while now. I think you are amazing, and I think you're going to be such an amazing benefit to our listeners, and that I believe that productivity and habits go hand in hand like peanut butter and jelly. And we are such good friends. I think you and I go together like peanut butter and jelly.
Oh, I totally agree. In fact, I'm sort of feeling like this conversation is for you and me, and everybody can just listen in if they want.
I think so too. I mean, honestly, we should record ourselves more often when we're chit-chatting, and maybe that will be the future of my podcast. I know that when you and I start talking and collaborating and just get our energies going about productivity and habits and business and entrepreneurship, there's like nothing that stops us. So I'm so happy you're here, and I can't wait to dive in and learn more about you and let our listeners get to know some key takeaways about how habits can change their life.
Awesome. Well, I'm ready. Let's go.
Okay, awesome. So before we get started, can you just share with us a little bit about yourself and your company and how you service your clients?
Absolutely. Well, I am the director of Tiny Habits Academy, and Tiny Habits is a method that was developed by my brother, BJ Fogg. He's an associate professor at Stanford University. And BJ and I have worked together for over 8 years. Initially, I started working in the area of online behavior, and I was an outside consultant for Facebook. That was a pretty interesting experience. The last 4 years, I've transitioned over to really focusing more on habits and creating habits and how to basically implement the Tiny Habits method, which is a breakthrough method. It's evidence-based that helps people create habits without relying on willpower. And it happens really, really quickly. As far as my background, Amber, as you know, I have 8 children. Yes, I'm the mama.
I do know that, and I'm so glad you shared that, because that is just another reason why you're so amazing, that you are such a high achiever and you do so much and have 8 children.
Well, I thought you were going to say having 8 children was a high achiever. Maybe it is. I think it's
Well, considering I have 1 and I plan on stopping at 1, yes, you are an overachiever in that category.
Well, and the reason I share that is Because believe me, I have a working laboratory within the walls of my home and have had for years. So just through trial and error in my own experience, I've learned what works in changing human behavior in respect of trying to help my children create healthy habits and the right behaviors that we want our children to have. So it's been a pretty fun journey. But let's jump right into the Tiny Habits method. I really want to share with your listeners that the key to success with creating habits. And I know, Amber, we talked about specifically productivity habits. The Tiny Habits method applies to any aspect of your life that you want to create habits or behaviors that are ongoing.
Yeah, so I like that. And we might be focusing a little bit more on productivity habits, but we know as entrepreneurs that who we are is who we are in our business. So if we have good habits about self-care and we have good habits about our relationships, that can only support us being better entrepreneurs and showing up in a different way in our business. So I believe that habits are really the root of who we are. Habits compounded day in and day out just essentially get us the results that we either want or we don't want, but they do get us results, right? And so we want our habits to work for us.
Yeah, you know what? If you look at our lives, our character really is derived from what we do day in and day out, and it comes down to habits and routines. So this is like I said, it's fundamental. It's the foundation to life, and it's also the foundation to being successful in business and being productive.
So we are going to go through building a tiny habit. And first, can you tell us why tiny habit and not big habit or habits? Like, what's the methodology behind saying tiny habit?
Well, the real key, and if you think back to the first of the year when you created a New Year's resolution, many of us still do that. Those of us that don't, it's because in the past when we've done that, it hasn't worked. And it's because we always try to change our behavior or create habits too big. We start off way, way, way too big. And as a result, they're not sustainable. They don't become habitual in our life because we get discouraged. The Tiny Habits method is a hack. When my brother, BJ, created this method, he did it as an experiment. He's always experimenting with new methods and approaches to human behavior. And this actually was so successful that we've created a program, we've created training around this, and we've taken over 66,000 people through our free 5-day online program that anybody can sign up for. But the key is really making the habit very, very tiny. And when I say tiny, I mean a behavior that takes 30 seconds or less to complete. So that's what we call, obviously, the tiny behavior. And that tiny behavior is attached to an anchor moment. Now, when I say anchor moment, it can be used interchangeably with a trigger. What's an existing routine in your life that can trigger the new habit? But the real secret and the real key to creating habits is attaching a positive emotion to that behavior that you want to repeat. Now, that's not so obvious, but that really is the secret. Just releasing that dopamine in your brain that wants you to consciously and subconsciously repeat the behavior over and over again.
You know, Linda, that's interesting you say that because when we were just chit-chatting about ideas and topics for today's episode, I had said, hey, I want to know why is it so easy to eat chocolate every day but not 2 cups of vegetables? And I think you just answered it, right? So I get a little high, right? A little benefit initially from eating the chocolate, even though long term that is so not helping me with my goals of fitness or weight loss or healthiness, right?
Exactly. And in fact, bad habits are created the exact same way that good habits are. Look back and look at the emotions that were attached to that behavior, whether it's a good behavior or an unwanted behavior, bad behavior, and look at the emotional attachment. Typically, it's either it helps you feel good or it removes fear. It removes pain. It's still an emotion. In fact, Amber, this is what was interesting to me. When I was doing a presentation a month ago, I was speaking to a group of women, actually here in Las Vegas. One of the women in the audience was a molecular biologist. I didn't know this, but as I was teaching the Tiny Habits method and talking about the importance of attaching a positive emotion to any behavior that you want to become habitual, she raised her hand and she said, hey, that makes so much sense to me because I'm a molecular biologist. I look at people's blood all day long. People that are negative and grumpy have toxic blood. We see it in the slides. People that are positive and have a good outlook on life have clean blood. This is not just a theory. It's a reality. It's through every fiber of our body. So this is why with the Tiny Habits method, we encourage, not only encourage, but it's required when you create a tiny habit to do an instant celebration, attach an instant positive emotion to that behavior. That can be something as easy or simple as going, woohoo, I did it. Way to go. Just something as small as like that. Now, it's not eating a piece of chocolate because that's not instant, or, a glass of wine. That's not instant, but it's an instant, immediate release of positive emotion when you do a new behavior, new habit.
So it's just celebrating that initial first habit and whatever. Do you have to play around with what works for you? So like, woohoo, that probably wouldn't work for me. I would feel a little weird like I did just now doing it. But there's other ways. Like, I know that you have a huge list of ways in which we can reward ourselves, correct?
Yes. In fact, I've done a lot of research on this, obviously, and I have a list of 102 ways to celebrate tiny habits. Now, of course, this is not all the ways in the entire world, but it's a good start for people to look at and see, okay, maybe I can try this one, or maybe I can try that one.
I just had a huge aha, Linda. I have my clients and they come in, I'm talking to them, I'm coaching them, and they generally are like, all right, this week, that's it. I'm going to do my block schedule and I'm going to work out in the morning and I'm going to show up at the office at 8 a.m. and I'm going to do my highest value activity. They go through and they totally flip their schedule upside down, right? And I look at them and I give them some straight talk and say, and how long do you think that's going to last? Because they are changing everything and they're trying to go against every already automatic habit they have. And then when it doesn't work out, what's that emotion that they're having? It's a negative emotion because they set themselves up for failure when they don't hit those really high multiple habits that they're trying to change. Then they just associate the whole thing with a negative energy. And so what you're saying is taking small little steps, doing it and rewarding yourself, and that reward, if I understand you correct, kicks you in motion to be more consistent with that habit.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, Amber, having a negative experience in creating a habit or a new behavior or changing, your lifestyle is actually worse than doing nothing. You think, well, something's better than nothing, even if you fail. Well, it actually has such a negative impact on you that it's worse than just not doing anything at all.
Can you take me through creating a tiny habit?
Yes, let me do that. In fact, Amber, give me an example and I'll just sort of coach you through this and let our listeners listen into this process. Give me an example of a productivity habit that you would like to create in your life on a daily basis.
Okay, so I'm going to be speaking for my clients, for my listeners, and for me, because I do struggle with this from time to time. And I'll start backwards because I don't know what the habit is, and I'm sure that's what you help me with. But as entrepreneurs, we always have that major activity that we need to do on a consistent basis to grow our business. So for some people, it's content creation. For others, it's lead generation. So something very specific that's usually tied to revenue, done on a consistent basis. The challenges that I have and most entrepreneurs have is we schedule it for 9 a.m. with ourselves, and then guess what? We stand ourselves up. We don't show up, or we do something else. So we don't hold to the habit of having that block time for that activity. Is that something you could help me with?
Absolutely. In fact, also, not only you might set that time aside, but you haven't attached it to an existing behavior that already occurs that will act as a trigger that basically is like a light switch that says, do this next step now. So let's talk about content creation. So Amber, if you are wanting to create new content on a daily basis or make that a habit, at what point in your day would you like to set aside that time?
I would like it to be the first thing I do in the morning before distractions and my day gets away from me.
Okay. And is that when you get to your office? Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Generally, I'm in my office by 8:30 in the morning.
Okay. So what do you do when you get to your office? Walk me through that sequence of routines, that existing behavior. When you walk in the door to your office, what do you do?
That is hilarious. I actually do have a routine. So I walk in and I put my bag and my jacket, if I have it, on my little hanger. I take my phone out of my purse. I take my water bottle out of my bag and set it on my desk. Then I fill up my little humidifier aromatherapy and turn that on. I have a salt lamp and I turn my salt lamp on. And then I go and sit down at my desk and turn on my computer. I do have quite a routine. None of that has anything to do with content creation, but I do have a routine I do every single day.
Well, but you know what? That's really important to identify what your routine is. And we all have those, but we don't pay attention necessarily to what those sequence of events are. And this is what's important with this method. So after you turn on your computer, do you have an application, a program? Where do you want to create your content?
My content would be created in Word, Microsoft Word.
All right, great. If I were your coach, your Tiny Habits coach, and I was helping you create a habit of content creation, and I'm assuming that you do have that block of time, let's say 30 minutes, that you want to spend on content creation at that time of your morning with no other distractions, what I would coach you to do is after you turn on your computer, you would open up your Microsoft Word program to create your content and celebrate. So that simple step is you turn on your computer, open up your program, celebrate. Good job. Way to go. I did it. Woohoo. Whatever it is that makes you feel like you're making movement forward on that step. Very tiny behavior. But the fact that you've got that into a routine, that's part of your now existing routine. It dovetails into everything else that you're doing in the morning. It's sort of like the bookend of your morning routine. And you're attaching a positive emotion to that little tiny step of just opening up that program. That becomes habitual. That gets rooted into, like I said, into your daily routine, like your other pieces of your routine that you just walked me through. The fact that you celebrated and attached a positive emotion to that, the likelihood of you going ahead and writing whatever it is, starting to write something is very high. Now, if you don't, that's not a failure because the tiny habit was after you turn on your computer, you'll open up your Word doc and celebrate. Now, even if you wanted to take that a bit further, say that your Word doc opens up automatically, it could be after I sit down on my computer and open up my Word doc, I will write one sentence. It's a starter step that gets you on the path to doing the bigger behavior. And you're doing it at the time of day that you have allotted to actually do that larger behavior as well. You're planting a little tiny seed. There's a lot of plant and seed analogy with tiny habits is you plant a little tiny seed in the right spot and nurture it and it expands and it grows. So in this case, to reiterate, you've identified that you want to write first thing in the morning when you get to your office. And the very last step of your existing habit and routines of getting to your office is turning on your computer. So that needs to be your anchor moment that triggers the next step, which in your case might just be opening up a Word doc or opening up your Word doc and writing one sentence, celebrating that. If you do more than that, that's extra credit. But if that's all you do, that's fine. You've still succeeded in creating that as a habit. You're starting to plant that seed in that spot.
Oh my gosh, I love that. It seems so intuitive, and yet you've created such a formula and been able to articulate it so well. I can think of so many other areas of my life that when you're just like, okay, just do one load of laundry or just do that one thing and then you do it and then all of a sudden the rest of your house is all clean. It's like just getting in motion and then celebrating you did the one thing you wanted to do and it snowballs. And that is so applicable to our businesses. The other thing that actually excited me about what you said was the aha is I talk to my clients about it, but until you're coached, and that is the power of having a coach, is that you see things differently for yourself that you would not otherwise see. You told me and I don't know if you realized it, was just to write for 30 minutes. And for me, in my head, I think I need to do writing or content creation for like 1 to 2 hours. And so I'm like, on my schedule, that's not going to happen every single day of 2 hours of content writing in the morning, maybe in the afternoon. And so you were like, no, 30 minutes. I'm like, I can totally do 30 minutes. And then now look what happens. I would have that compounded over 5 days. Maybe one day it would be one sentence and another day I would be in my flow and just write. So I love that.
Amber, that's a perfect example of how and this is human nature, how we all attack creating habits too big. It's like writing for two hours a day. Well, that's a really big habit. And if if that chain breaks one day or the other, you feel discouraged and think, oh, well, this isn't going to work either. But you can open up your Word doc and celebrate. And if you write, that's awesome. And if you don't, that's fine. You're still making movement forward and creating that as a habit. And you asked me earlier, what are some fallacies or what are some misconceptions about habits? The biggest one is that it takes 21 days to create a habit. Completely false. It does not take 21 days to create a habit. You can create a habit in 5 days or less.
Seriously?
Yes, absolutely you can. Simply because of the success momentum. You're feeling successful. You're moving forward by just opening up your Word doc. There's no resistance to that. And by doing it at the same time in your routine every single day, that's becoming a habit. And as a result, you start expanding that habit and letting it grow.
So let me ask you this. When you're in a habit, I've often spoken to my clients, when something becomes a habit, it's kind of that paradise zone because you're doing it without thinking about it and you don't feel like you have to be disciplined or willpower. That is where you want to be with anything good, is in that habit zone. That's kind of how the analogy that I use with my clients. Before you get in the habit zone and you're trying to create a habit, you really have to think about it and you feel like you're changing something and there's some resistance to it. So you're saying that you can get from resistance to the habit paradise zone within 5 days?
Yes, you absolutely can. We study this. We have research that backs this up. This is an evidence-based program.
That's amazing. So talk to me just briefly about compounding your habits. So you had told me the first habit would be just to open up the Word doc and celebrate.
Correct. Yep.
So once that is a habit, then I add the next one that says to write one sentence, or could I put those two together right at the beginning?
Well, and you wouldn't even have to write one sentence. You open up your Word doc and celebrate. Now, the expectation is that, yes, you're going to go ahead and at least write one sentence, or you're going to spend 30 minutes or whatever time that you have identified in that time slot that you do want to spend writing. It happens organically. It's an organic process as long as you're attaching that positive emotion, releasing that dopamine to that little tiny behavior. Now, opening up your Word doc, 30 seconds or less. I mean, that doesn't take any time at all whatsoever to do. But by being prepared, by being in the moment, by celebrating, attaching a positive emotion, that takes root and expands and grows. So yeah, writing one sentence, you could redesign your tiny habit to be after I sit down or after I open up my computer, after I get to my office and open up my computer, I will open up my Word doc and write one sentence. You could have that as one behavior because that still might take 30 seconds or less for you to do. What you're doing is you're removing the willpower, you're removing the motivation, you're removing all of those barriers that you might put in front of yourself to not do this behavior if you said, I'm going to write for an hour or I'm going to write for 30 minutes.
Well, I think this is magic for our listeners, and I think that's a great place to end on, is that what you root expands. I think that's the verbiage you just used, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, that's amazing. Hey, Linda, okay, so our time is coming to an end right now, and I want to respect your time, our listeners' time, and I know that we could probably keep talking about this, so I'm sure I'll have you back on the show. But I know that you have something really special for our listeners, so before we end, would you like to share that with them?
Well, I would love to. In fact, like I mentioned earlier, we have a free 5-day program. All you need to do is go to tinyhabitsacademy.org. And you'll see there's a button there that you sign up for our free 5-day program. We actually teach you this method in depth during that program. And sometimes if we have coaches that are going through their apprenticeship that we're training, we may even assign you to a real person. We may assign you to a coach to help you do this. But going through this free 5-day program really gives you the tools and the ability. And habit creation is a skill. That's another way to look at it that nobody else is looking at it. It's a skill. But we get you on the path and the journey to learn this skill by going through this free 5-day program. And it's open to anybody. We do it every single week. Starts every Monday. So if you want to get in line to start on Monday, sign up the week before and we'll get you set up and let you go through this program and really learn this as a skill and be able to design tiny habit recipes that you want to have in your life.
Oh my gosh, this is amazing. So for any of my listeners, I believe this is a skill that you need to have to increase your productivity. So we will have a link out in the show notes at theproductivityspecialist.com/012 for episode 12. So this is episode 12, Tiny Habits with Linda Fogg Phillips, and you can find a link directly on our website there. And so one last thing, Linda, before I let you go, what is one thing that you do on a consistent basis to take consistent, massive, focused action in your business? So what is your tiny habit that helps grow your business?
Well, and this will sound very funny because you won't think it's productivity related, but it really truly is. The one thing that I do every single day is the tiny habit of after my feet hit the floor in the morning, I will say it's going to be a great day. What I find is that sets my mindset into a positive, productive mindset for the day, as opposed to getting up and feeling overwhelmed. It shifts my mindset to realizing that I can control my day and be a victor, as opposed to letting my day control me and be a victim. So it sets my mindset for productivity.
Bam! If every listener went and set that tiny habit for them, I know they'd be much more productive. So you are a victor instead of a victim of your day, your schedule. Wow, what a great ending, Linda. Thank you so much for being here with us. While I've loved having you listen to Productivity Straight Talk, I need to be straight with you. No change, no change. And without taking action, nothing will change for you or your business. So based on what you learned, what will you take action on today? Are you going to go download and join her Tiny Habits Academy to go through a 5-day course so that you can learn the skill of being productive? To share your actionables and receive support, guidance, and motivation from entrepreneurs just like you, join us inside Productivity Straight Talk private Facebook community. You can join by going to productivitycommunity.com. So that's it. That's my straight talk for you today. And until next week, make it a productive week.